Welcome to Let's Chew the Gum. I'm your host, Protocol. We're talking about a lot of things in this show while we chew the gum. And as always, on each and every show, we always have
something for your mind, something for your mind, something for your mind,
정신을 집어넣으세요. 어떤 것 필요합니까?
something for your
정신을 집어넣으세요.
mind,
정신을 집어넣으세요.
something for your
Welcome back to this edition of Let's Chew the Gum, the podcast where we talk about everything from A to Z, and we chew the gum while doing it. Some folks ask, why chew the gum? Is it rude to talk and chew gum? Well, we don't think so. We think it's okay to talk and chew gum. It gives you rhythm, focus, and if the freshness of breath is a side effect, that's okay too. I'm so happy today to have as a guest Susan Christensen, author who goes by the pen name Professor Sue C. She is the author of Auggie the Dragon, who lives on Grandma Sue's roof. Sue has a variety of perspectives and a varied background, and we're so glad that she'll be here today to share some insights about at-risk youth, and tune in to see what other great topics we can bring out. So let me go ahead and introduce Susan Christensen. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Doctor. It's good to be here with you.
Absolutely. I was so excited to read up on your bio and just to look at your background. I know we have a few things in common, which is our affinity for helping others, and particularly the youth in our communities with our educational background and just the type of work that we do. But I'm sure that our audience will enjoy what you have to offer, and they'll find it beneficial. So perhaps let's start out talking about your new book that I had just talked about, Auggie the Dragon, who lives on Grandma Sue's roof.
Well, thank you. Auggie the Dragon was inspired one day when my then under 3-year-old granddaughter came over to my apartment, which was like a little cottage, and she heard the refrigerator go on. Because being a writer, I didn't have television on the background. And she heard it and she said, "Grandma, what's that?" And I said, "Oh, honey, that's just the refrigerator." Well, then my wheels started turning and the heater came on. And in this apartment, my heater sounded like somebody was dragging a dead body across the roof, and then it would go whoosh like that. And so that startled her, and she goes, "Grandma, what is that?" And I said, "That's the dragon that lives on Grandma Sue's roof." And she looked at me and her eyes got big, and I told her, I said, it's okay. He's friendly. He loves Grandma Sue. He keeps me warm and he protects me. And so I took her over to the heater vent and she could feel the heat coming down. And so I asked her, I said, "What do you think he looks like?" And to my surprise, she says, "He's purple with pink flower tattoos." And I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, what do you think his name is?" And she says, "Well, his name is Auggie." And that was the inspiration that started the story of Auggie the Dragon, who lives on Grandma Sue's roof. And the story starts out in the high desert, and Grandma Sue's heater breaks, and so she calls, and the heater repair people tell her, "Oh no, it's going to be a while, your heater's old, we can't find another one." And so they froze and they got creative in how to keep warm, and one morning the cottage was warm when they woke up. And so Grandma Sue calls the heater repair people. They go, "We didn't do anything." So they go up on the roof, and there's Auggie the Dragon on the roof, and he had been heating the cottage. And the story develops, and circumstances happen and everyone gets separated. So Sierra and her little sister, my granddaughter, they create a banner for Auggie to see when he comes back, which tells him to go to the mountains. And he eventually meets back up with Grandma Sue in the mountains. And the town of Wrightwood, he gets discovered. The town of Wrightwood comes together and protects him because they don't want to have another King Kong. And the story just continues to the point that the news media comes. I don't want to give away too much of the story, but the town all rallies together and Auggie finds a home amongst the people in Wrightwood, and everybody lives happily ever after. But the story is unique in the fact that it is a 5,000-word poem, and I do use a lot of vocabulary that might be challenging, but helps expand the vocabulary for children and makes it a little interesting for parents. And because the story is narrated by the voice of a 5-year-old, my 5-year-old granddaughter, she tells the story. And so she's telling the story of her grandma and Auggie's adventures. So the storyline. I've gotten great feedback from kids as young as 5 that totally understood the whole concept and wishes Auggie could come warm their house, and they're happy that he's kind. And I've even had, surprisingly, men in their 60s and 70s have given me great reviews too. And I had one family friend tell my mother, wow, it was like a real story. So it's an adventure, and there's little twists and turns that the adults reading it will get. One of Auggie's tattoos says "Frolic Honolulu Forever," tying him to Puff the Magic Dragon. Mm-hmm. So there's just little gems within it, and then there's a lot of lessons that can be brought out, a lot of discussion that can be had in the classroom or within the family on ageism, gender, marginalized populations, and acceptance is the key. Accepting one another.
That is outstanding. Just the idea that it's attractive to people of all ages, that makes it even more appealing. And for the fact that it's from the perspective or being told by your granddaughter, and it's for children, it's fantastic as a literacy development component. But also the fact that you have issues or concepts of social justice in there. And that seems like a great way to start kids at an early age to focus on those topics of acceptance, as you said, and ageism and gender issues. That sounds great. What do you hope that the audience, the readers, would get from that, and whether they're children or adults? What do you hope they would get from the story?
Well, first and foremost, a little distraction from the times that we're experiencing right now. Mm-hmm. And the social connection and being able to see things from a different perspective, that different isn't bad. It's simply a different perspective, a different way of doing things, and mainly to promote acceptance and just an enjoyable time that families can spend together. One of the things, I am a poet through and through. Ever since I was a small child, I've written poetry. I've processed the world through a poetic lens. Mm. And my daughter one time showed up with a book called Frederick the Mouse. Mm-hmm. And it's an award-winning book. I And I read the story, and it's about this mouse who, while everybody else is working and the other mice, they all live in the wall of this barn and an abandoned farm, and so they have to gather their goods for the winter. And while all the other mice are gathering their goods, Frederick is gathering the sun's rays and the colors of the flowers, and the other mice are kind of looking at him like, hey, come on, help us. And he's like, oh, I am. I'm gathering my things. I'm gathering what I need, what I do here. And so they just kind of, went on with their business collecting, and pretty soon the winter comes and they all go into the wall of the barn, and everybody's fine for a while. The provisions are abundant, but as the time goes on, the provisions grow low, tempers begin to rise, agitation, and pretty soon the mice look at Frederick and go, hey, what about all that stuff you were doing while we were working? And so Frederick jumps up on the rock and starts reciting a poem about how the sun will shine again, that the seasons will come and go, and that things will be okay. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of laughed because I thought, is my daughter telling me I'm lazy? Like I don't do my part? What are you trying to tell me? And she goes, no, Mom. She told me, your mind is just so beautiful, and the things that, when things come out, the stories you write, it serves a purpose. And so as this time that we're facing, this pandemic with people being isolated, and I really think it's time for those of us with our poetic natures, this is our time. This is our time to speak out and remind people of the joy that we do have, and the joy that we can experience no matter what is going on around us. And the group that I mentor, Tomorrow's Leaders in Mojave River Valley, there's a poem that I had on the wall or on my refrigerator when my kids were growing up. And this is something that I would like all of us to keep in mind. It's called Brighten the Corner Where You Are. And it's a poem by Helen Steiner Rice. And it's very simple, but the message is so powerful. And this is something that I have all of my students read also. And it's, we cannot all be famous nor listed in who's who, but every person, great or small, has important work to do. For seldom do we realize the importance of small deeds, or to what degree of greatness unnoticed kindness leads. For it is not the big celebrity in a world of fame and praise, but it's doing unpretentiously in undistinguished ways. The work that God assigned us, unimportant as it seems, that makes our task outstanding and brings reality to dreams. So do not sit and idly wish for wider new dimensions where you can put in practice your many good intentions. But at the spot God placed you, begin at once to do little things to brighten up the lives surrounding you. If everyone brightens up the spot on which they're standing by being more considerate and a little less demanding, this dark old world would very soon eclipse the evening star if everyone brightened up the corner where they are.
Oh my goodness, that is outstanding. I'm so glad you shared that, not only with my audience, but just with me personally. That is outstanding, and it's so true, and I think it's like timeless. That is so timeless for it, and it's particularly relevant for the time we're in now. I had a few guests on earlier shows when we were doing some episodes when we started the social distancing, and I was mentioning that I had been focusing on some of the positives that have come from this, and so we were doing sort of our top 3 positives, and one of my top 3 was just time that we have to be able to reflect on the good things we have, or to reflect on ourselves as individuals and the parts we can play to benefit others. And so that poem, Brighten the Corner Where You Are, you said by Helen Steiner
Yeah.
Wright, is that correct?
Helen Steiner Rice. Yes.
That's great.
Yeah, and it's so simple, that it's something everyone can do, from the smallest child to whoever we might be. And to me, that poem is so empowering. And I think right now a lot of us feel kind of powerless in some ways, and confused, and wondering just what is this, how is this going to manifest? What does our future look like? And so I have it right next to my office. I read it at least once or twice a day and just remind myself that I can control the realm that I influence.
Absolutely. I'm going to put it right by my office now.
Yeah. If I influence something, then someone else, if I make someone else's life a little better, then they might be able to reach out and make another person's life a little better.
Absolutely.
And I was having a conversation with Matthew. He's the director of Moses House Ministries up here in Victorville. And he and I got into a discussion about what it means to be Christ-like. What did his message present to us? And it also tied into an economics class that I took at Claremont, where the professor said that old adage that two can live as cheaply as one, she said, no, it's actually two can live as cheaply as 1.4. And Matthew and I's discussion, he had come to the conclusion that if within a congregation or within a group of people, a family, a school, that if two people who were doing okay, each pitched in what a third person might need to make ends meet, that we could all support each other. And then he brought out that Christ sent his followers, his apostles out 2 by 2, and they were instructed that if they saw someone without a coat, to give them their coat. And we got into a little bit of a discussion, and it occurred to me, because probably between the two people, they might have more than one coat. So even if I gave my coat, my partner in this might have a coat then that I could have because I gave my coat away. So I just found it interesting that both scripturally and economically, those two philosophies merge and meet and are practical. So even on that level, if we know someone who needs something and somebody else, we have a friend or family member that's doing okay too, and maybe if two of us each adopt another family or another person and just share what little extra we might have during this time, because I think that's empowering too when we solve the issues and where we're not waiting for things to happen for us.
Absolutely.
Where we take control. I think it's good for and the beauty of it is every time we do something good, those wonderful endorphins that lift up our spirits are released, and so we actually are doing something good for ourselves when we do something good for someone else.
Sort of the hidden curriculum portion, that's wonderful. It's sort of a philosophy I take as an educator. If I teach history, and I've mentioned this on the show before, but I tell my students, if you leave my class and all you have learned is history, you really miss the point, because we use history as a vehicle to drive home a lot of the concepts that you talked about acceptance, about community and social responsibility, about really just being a good person. And the whole idea is if I'm helping individuals, and they are finding their place in my class. My class is always a place that is welcoming to everyone that comes in there, and it's emphasized, and they know that they're welcome, and it's a safe place. I mean, the remarkable transformations that I see in students as they are engaged in the class and as they leave, they don't leave the same. And typically, they leave out with a service mentality that they are obligated to more than just themselves, and that it's a community and it's a large world that we're also responsible for. But if you're just helping one, it's like the old commercial. I think it was a shampoo commercial where you tell two friends and they'll tell two friends, and so on and so on. It's exponential growth. And so that's great. And just, as you said, brightening your own corner. Well, when you brighten that corner and you've brightened it for someone else, how many times and how often do they multiply that and spread it around? And I'm so glad that you take that approach.
Yeah, and that actually ties into the work that I do with blue collar leadership in the corporate setting.
Yes.
And I just actually got a phone call this morning from one of my clients that we are going to go virtual with the training. So that's exciting.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a minute. I know briefly. I'm sorry. I know briefly because you do a variety of things. And a moment ago, you spoke about your group, Tomorrow's Leaders, and then you have the compassionate accountability. I saw it and then you just mentioned blue collar leadership, and I know there's a few others. So let's talk a little bit about some of the other types of service work that you're doing.
Well, one of the things that I have just started a conversation with one of the professors at CGU in the positive psychology department.
Claremont Graduate University, correct?
Pardon me?
CGU, Claremont Graduate University?
Claremont Graduate University.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I was...
No, it's okay.
Yeah, and his, Jessica, his assistant, and I she's on fire about this. So I came up with the acronym SAVVY, Social, Academic, Vocational Integration in the classroom and the workplace. And so for my current students, I teach sociology at Victor Valley College, and for their current class project, I'm giving some of the students an option to create their own social support group. And then what I'll do is use the actual training that I use for the corporate blue-collar leadership training to train them to become trainers. And at the end of the summer, by the time we get to the end of the summer, they will actually end up being Savvy certified trainers. And our goal is to then get Savvy into the school districts and encourage whole-bodied, which is the trend and the direction that we're going with education and teaching. And one of the things that I kind of stumbled on, but it's also research-based, is the first 2 weeks of my classrooms, of my classes, the first 2 weeks, we don't even open the book. I do a process called PI, which is Purpose Inventory. It's a series of 18 questions that by the time the questions are revealing but not intrusive. So I've done this assessment on at least 250 people, and every person, I have never had anyone say, "Oh, that doesn't fit me." And the interesting thing is that's not even what I find the most valuable component. They end up with a statement like, my purpose inventory reveals that my core gift is that the expression that acceptance leads to harmony will be my legacy. So that's my pie. That's what my pie inventory reveals, my core gift. So you end up with this great statement at the end, But the most valuable part of it is you sit, and in a ideal setting, I would actually sit with each student and listen to their 18 answers. Now, when you're, and I've done that with clients over the years, working with clients with disabilities and different backgrounds. But in the classroom, we do it one of two ways. They either ask each other the questions, or they go home, they fill out the survey, and then they come back, and then we go through the process of finding their core gift or their pie inventory. And the things that I learn about the students from it, it's the process that's valuable, not necessarily the end product, but the process of having these students realize that you're taking that time to actually listen to what they've written down, because I have them all turn them in, and then I review them, and then I know who I'm teaching.
Sure.
And the other thing it does is it gives me an understanding of how to motivate
Absolutely.
each student, not just as a class, but as individuals. And one of the things I came across in my research for the blue collar leadership is that leadership, oftentimes in the past, leadership has been, especially in the classroom, get you through my class, get you a good grade, get you gone. And that it's simply learning material and then moving on. But what education is finding is true leadership in the classroom is just like you were saying. It's not just learning the subject. It's not just memorizing the dates or the sociological labels in my case. But motivating these students and lighting their fire and igniting in them passion and helping them find that goal that's going to keep them going. And that when we do a great job as educators, they, like you said, they take so much more with them, and they're empowered from that point on.
Absolutely.
To continue toward
Absolutely.
their ultimate goal,
You know,
not just pass the class.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, you mentioned we have a lot in common, and it's so true. I'm just listening to you, and I'm just applauding silently off the microphone because it's fantastic. I mean, getting into the class, and as you said, students who realize that you have taken time to invest in them and to learn them, I mean, that's powerful. I mean, it at the level, the college level where you're speaking at the college level where I teach, and in the high school as well, at all levels, for students to become engaged, they need to have a purpose. They need to have a buy-in. And the fact that you show that interest, and the fact that they find a purpose for themselves, now it helps them to place themselves within the classroom and within the materials. And then the classroom, the subject, the labels, they have relevance, right? It means something, because now they can use that along with the purpose that you've helped them to find. And again, it's not just going over material and getting a grade and moving on. That's great. I mean, it really is great, and I'm thrilled that you're doing that, and I hope that others are tuning into and listening to that. Really helping students to find their core gift. And I imagine that students would leave that classroom and would never forget it, and probably would want to come back for more, I'm sure.
Well, what's happened is two of the classes that I'm teaching currently, and this is the sixth class that I taught. They are high school students enrolled in college, so it's the dual enrollment. So they are these fresh young kids, and then I this semester is the first time that I taught actually on campus at BBC with adults, and so I was wondering if my technique was going to work as well, and it's actually, the adults are responding almost more hungrily for that one-on-one, somebody to listen to them.
Sure.
So it's kind of cool. And I got baptized with fire with this whole concept, because while I was working on my master's at Claremont, I was substitute teaching. And for every substitute teacher, the caveat is that long-term sub position.
Right.
Well, I got a long-term sub position in what's called the Success Program, which is, and this group, they were middle school boys, and the classroom was middle school boys in lieu of expulsion, and they were all on IEPs, so they all came with challenges, and so working with them, and then after that semester, I got hired on full time to work with the high school boys. And so I found myself with an emergency teaching credential, so no classroom management, nothing, just I raised 4 kids. My children are grown, so I did have the mom thing
Sure.
coming in, but I was just dropped, just boom. And what I found was these, especially with this group of kids, there's a saying, nobody cares what you know until they know that you care.
Exactly.
And this population, that is gospel. So I started doing this PI inventory and evaluating their core gifts and sitting and going through this process. And I found that once I reached their heart and they knew that I was invested in them, it changed the whole dynamic of the classroom. And these kids, we got to do some amazing things. We used to, I had a great team. I had 2 aides, and we would do things like bring the toaster oven to school, and we'd do baking projects right in the classroom, hands-on. They learned how to watch bread rise, and I just did a lot of the things I did with my own kids that could transfer into academic learning without it being sitting at a desk, because
Absolutely.
that's something these kids didn't do well. But I ended up finding gifts and talents in these kids. I had one kid that I had my personal computer. I sent it to the IT guy at the district, and he sent it back to me and said, go buy a new computer, it's lost. So one of my kids said, oh, I work on computers. I said, you know what, $100. If you can fix that, $100. Of course, I didn't think he could,
Right.
because the IT guy sent it back to me, right?
Right.
He comes back the next weekend, my computer's fixed. So
Just
I was like,
new.
oh my goodness, now what do I do? So
Right.
I went and got him, I cleared it with my principal. I got him a $100 gift card from Target.
Right. No, it's so surprising for some folks who don't understand when you have those at-risk populations. I was an at-risk youth, and I always tell people, never give up on those kids. Invest time in them, because you never know what they may become and the contributions they can make. You can see the labels of poor, inner city, student of color, single parent home, drug addicted family, whatever it may be. But those are situations. That's not the student. Let me just take a quick break for our audience and remind them you're listening to Let's Chew the Gum, the podcast where we talk about everything from A to Z while we chew the gum. Feel free to send us an email at letschewthegum@gmail.com if there's a show topic you'd like to hear, or if you'd be interested in being a guest on the show as well. You can find us on most podcast platforms and social media. Today, I'll give the email address of www.anchor.fm/protocol. You can find the podcast there and listen there as well. And you can also find several other platforms where you may be able to tune in, such as Spotify and iTunes and iHeartRadio, quite a bit. My guest today is Susan Christensen, poet, educator, inspirational, motivational speaker. I would say she's motivating me today, and I know that she's motivating quite a few in our audience. So we'll be right back. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with Susan in just a moment.
Mind. Something for your mind. Mind. Mind.
베이스볼 야
Something for your mind.
무엇인가 정신에 집어넣으세요.
If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
Something for your mind.
Thank you all for listening to our sponsors. Again, you're listening to Let's Chew the Gum, the podcast where we talk about everything from A to Z. And we're back to continue our conversation with Susan Christensen. So, Susan, before we went to break, you were just talking about the youth population that you had worked with and the 8th grade level and the success program, and then also at high school, and just really saying that your purpose inventory and just your investment in time in that population revealed so many gifts, I would say, and talents that they have that may otherwise go unnoticed. And I was mentioning that it's so important for us to not forget that these are people and their conditions don't accurately portray who they are. So it's important to make that distinction, right?
For sure. That's for sure. Because what I found, especially with the high school boys, is that, and I say boys because it was a segregated classroom, it was all boys, and I learned a whole lot about all the male hierarchy and masculine, expressions of masculinity, and the one thing that I found with this group of boys is, and I have 3 sons myself, so I have, and a daughter, but I had a little bit coming in.
Right.
The one thing that I found with these boys is they would get into their little scuffles, and by the time I got done writing the report for the principal, they were out playing basketball together.
It was done and over.
Blew my mind.
Yeah.
Until I realized that they were establishing their hierarchy in the class. And the one thing I observed was that as long as one of the boys didn't back down, they could resolve it without even fighting. You know what I'm saying? That it didn't necessarily have to go to blows, but it was just they were just feeling each other out.
Sure.
And
it's like
the boys let it go once it was established. Hey, we're good. They let it go, and they could be brought back together. And I did have a principal that tried to mix the boys and the girls together, which did not work well. And what I found with the girls is they tended to really nurture these differences, and if somebody got mad at somebody, then it was like recruiting their friends, and it took on a whole different created a whole different creature. So I learned a lot about just the dynamics, and I also it caused me to do a lot of research on intergender communication.
How about that?
And how men and women express themselves differently, what communication means in different, we communicate differently in words and even patterns of speaking and all those kinds of things, those nuances between men and women. they're real, and it really does benefit us to understand the different ways men and women are socialized as boys and girls.
Absolutely.
In speaking and in expectations.
Sure. I'd like to add on to that in terms of even the ways that individuals communicate being different among various ethnic groups or various regions of the country. I think you touched upon something important when you talked about the boys getting into scuffles, and by the time you were writing the report, it was done and over. They're off playing. And I think oftentimes when individuals are not familiar, with the ways that folks communicate or socialize, something can seem threatening that's not at all. And I think particularly within our education system, and I'm going to talk specifically about young men of color, and I'll say even more specifically, young black men of color who tend to have an overrepresentation in discipline protocol, or we could extend it to the school to prison pipeline. Oftentimes their ways of communicating is misunderstood by teachers, and the first inclination is discipline, suspension, right? When it may not have been necessary to go that route. As you said, by the time you finish the report, they're often and doing something else. So sometimes it's a matter of establishing hierarchy. Maybe it's sometimes a way of communicating that's not familiar to someone and it sounds threatening. It's like if I was somewhere in a area where there's a group of chimpanzees or whatnot. I've heard chimpanzees communicating. When I'm listening, it sounds pretty threatening and I don't know what's going on, but it's establishing hierarchy. It's establishing sometimes loving relationships, but because I don't speak that language, it's foreign to me. And, I've seen people where they've been feeling threatened in those situations and they're pulling out weapons to defend themselves, but there's no threat. And we can apply that to Native American communities that have been misunderstood, or any community, a group of people that have been misunderstood. So the idea of intercultural communication and insight is so important to remember. And it sounds like you're on top of it.
Well, thank you, because, one of the reasons that I asked them questions, I would ask them, hey, and one of the things that I asked them was, because they'd all been through the special ed system, and I asked them, I said, when you were little, when things started not going well for you in the class, in the school setting, what would you do if your teacher handed you a paper, because a lot of these boys were dyslexic, they had legitimate learning disabilities. And consistently they told me, I'd throw the paper on the floor, I'd flip a desk, I'd throw a chair, because they told me they would rather be known as being bad than being stupid.
Yep. I've seen it 1,000 times.
So what we did, and what I would encourage, even elementary school teachers to do, is I met with each one of them, and you have to remember, this was a small group. This is 14 boys, and I had 2 aides, so I had the luxury of more one-on-one with them. But we developed a code so that they wouldn't have to, call if they were awkward about. Some of them were, fine about raising their hand and saying, hey, I don't get it. But if they weren't, they knew that, okay, if I put my pencil to this side, then that alerted me and my staff that, okay, he has a question. So somebody would then just go over and talk with them and just learn to communicate in different ways where the kids can feel that their voice is being heard. I think that's probably the most important thing is asking the child, what you're acting out here. What is it that we're missing? What can we do to make it better for you?
There you go.
To succeed in the class.
There you go. Sometimes they are not able to articulate, And oftentimes they haven't been in positions where they feel safe to articulate what they feel because they have not been respected by individuals who are supposed to be in charge and care for them. And as you said, I'll just get in trouble. It's a quick escape. I can act up and get out of here. But this goes back to me talking about creating safe environments where, like you said, you developed codes that you could use. And I've done that with my students. It could be a certain nod or a certain gesture that they make that lets me know, hey, I'm uncomfortable, or I like to just have a moment out, or I just need a quick break, right? And it helps them to be safe when you respect that. And you find that lots of students will respond to that. And then, you've tapped in, you've built relationships, you've built trust, you've built an environment where now students feel safe to be who they are. And pretty soon you may not even need the codes anymore. They're like, hey, this whole classroom environment is safe. We're all safe and I feel okay. And it really makes a difference. It goes so far in terms of engagement, academic acuity. And you find that often some of the students who normally don't perform well, they perform well for you. They've already always had those capabilities, but because of effective filters that were up or the environments of mistrust have been there, that they just don't display it. I'll just get in trouble and get out of here because my experience has told me that this person doesn't care anyway. And again, I can't say it enough. I'm so glad about your approach and the work that you're doing. I just cannot emphasize it and say it enough.
Well, I would welcome any input you might have in developing this, and we are on the ground floor of creating a curriculum-based program. One of the things, to go more specifically with Savvy, one of the things that I found is the inequity in the classroom between people who, I am the kid. I could sit in a desk all day long, take notes. I loved school. You know what I mean? I was that kid.
Mm-hmm.
But not everybody is that kid. And so in my teaching that I'm doing now, I try to make the grading equitable. So I have the students, they do at least 3 presentations per semester. And one of the things that I have them do is their sociological profile.
Mm-hmm.
And they put together a PowerPoint. So each student gets up and identifies the different aspects of their life in sociological terms, your backstage, your primary group. So we learn, and they also have to identify their ethnocentric beliefs,
Mm-hmm.
which that's always a fun one to help them to understand what that means. And so each student gets up in the class and shares who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found with that is then it allows the student who is the artist, the poet, the writer, the more creative mind, they'll come up with these mind-blowing presentations that engage their audience, and sometimes my very academic students, they get thrown off course. They're like, whoa, wait a minute.
Right.
I can't just write a paper.
Right,
And I'm like,
right.
No, you can't.
Yeah, you have to tap into some different areas
And
here.
so everybody has to get out of their comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
So the student that has trouble with the academic paper gets support and if they don't perform well in that realm, then they may excel at their sociological profile and get 100% on that.
Mm-hmm.
So it balances out
Absolutely.
the learning in the classroom. And like for their midterm, I have them, the first midterm is their sociological profile is the third of their grade. Their homework is another third, so I'm encouraging them to do that homework, read that textbook. And then the other third of their grade is an actual 15 question quiz, actual, regular, what we think of as a quiz or a test.
Sure.
So I combine all three of those components, and then that's the grade that they get for their midterm.
That's great.
So just trying to balance things.
No, you're providing, in my classrooms, I've always had alternative assessments. I've always provided multiple access points for students because some students, as you said, just aren't the test takers. They just aren't the writers, but they have many talents. I had one kid one year, he just wrote graffiti all year. That's all he ever would do. He'd come in and write graffiti, and he had talent, but he wouldn't read, he wouldn't speak, he wouldn't answer questions. And there came a time for a group project, and they had to present on Japan, and he was trying to figure out what he would do. And I said, hey, why don't you just make the sign for the group? And he made the sign Japan, and it was purple and looked airbrushed, light and dark purple. It was beautiful. And when the group finished presenting, folks talked about their presentation, but everyone was intrigued by his sign. Who did that? And so you could just see the pride in him start to well up inside. And after that, the next day he came to class, opened the book. He read everything for the rest of the year. He started producing and writing. He just found himself, and that was the catalyst for him. And it's go ahead.
He found a spot.
Yeah, exactly.
He got recognition, all the Maslow's hierarchy, right?
Exactly. And everyone prior to that would, down him for graffiti writing, and we ended up having a club for graffiti writers where we get, blank canvases and say, hey, if this is what you like to do, let's bring them in and do it, because we have them in a safe environment. We're engaged, and now there's conversations. And then we just added a little bit of the academics. We added some of the social responsibility. We added some of the group norms and personal responsibilities.
Yeah.
And
I'm laughing because I had taggers too, and these guys were like hardcore, some of them. And one of the things I asked them, I said, so what do you get from tagging? And you know what one of them said? They said, it's the only time anyone has told me anything that I've written is beautiful.
Wow.
Because some of them were like world-class taggers, But what I did one time, they gave us picnic benches for each of our classes. And so I went and bought spray paint, and I had them tag it with positive words. I gave them a list of like the year they were graduating, academic success, love, acceptance, so they tagged this picnic table with all these positive messages. And I came to work one morning, and one of the maintenance guys comes up to me and he goes, we almost repainted your picnic table because we saw it and we thought, holy moly, somebody, jumped the fence and tagged it up. And he says, but then we started reading it, and that was really cool.
How about that? How about that? No, that's outstanding.
That was a mix. I had people that really thought it was cool, and other people that thought I was encouraging bad behavior.
No, I would think that's short-sightedness. You have to reach your students where they are, right? I tell my university students who are in the teaching program, you have to teach the students that come through the door. You don't get to teach the students you want to all the time. So you have to reach them where they are, and you have to be, as an educator, creative and find ways to tap into your students, right? It's more about you adapting to them than it is them adapting to you, because you're one individual, but there are a multitude of personalities, desires, experiences, etc. And so it's incumbent upon the teacher to be able to come up with creative ways. And by doing that, it's not encouraging bad behavior. I mean, it's providing them an access point, and now they've engaged, and who knows what transforms from there. And beneath all of that, we can support that with the research that talks about the way the brain grows and develops for our adolescents. And so they're engaged in a lot of ways. So kudos to you. And those that think it's bad behavior, I don't have anything bad to say about them. I'm just going to say that they just aren't aware of the benefits of what you did. And so that's great. That's really good. Really good, man. There's so much
Yeah.
that we could discuss and so many great things. I think that I may need to have to ask you to come on to another show because it's just a rich conversation we're having. There's a lot of gems, a lot of useful information that our audience will be able to utilize. And I'd like to have you come back for a different show so that we could discuss some of the other service work that you're doing and professional engagements that you have, because I think it's valuable, and I definitely think that you are to be commended. And I know that you do it because of the love you have, and it's not in a boastful way that, you know, look what I can do. It's just something that you were, as you said, thrown into, and it's developed, and you learned, I think, a lot about your students and yourselves, just like I have, and look at all the good it's done.
Well, it comes from, I'm a product of a lot of programs.
Mm-hmm.
I was 15 when I had my first son.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I had three sons by the time I was 21 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I was married for 18 years, and after, most divorces are painful, after a very painful divorce, that's when I ended up going back to school. But I'll share this last bit with you, and I would be honored to join a conversation again with you. I've really enjoyed it. You're inspiring to me.
Oh, thank you.
But I was in the parenting minors program, and so while I was pregnant, they would pick us up at home and drive us to the little Sunday school building behind the Catholic Church, was where they had our parenting minors program. And so we had this little, safe little spot, and it was back, when pregnant girls were segregated from the rest of the school. And it was actually, for me, it was a comforting experience because it gave me a safe spot, and I was one of the youngest girls. And, we did things like we'd walk down to the local market. All of us little pregnant girls walk down and do our shopping, and we learned how to do grocery lists, all this stuff. Well, then I had my son, and I was supposed to go back to the high school, but when I got to the larger high school, I felt completely out of place because my agenda in life had switched, and the things that my friends were concerned about, I was a mom. And so I just wasn't doing well. And my poor mother, I woke up one day and told her, I'm not going back to school. I'm not getting anything out of it. And I'm always away from my son, and I'm just not going to do it. So she called my parenting minors teacher, who was now at the local continuation school. And they told my mom, bring her down, we'll get her enrolled. So I started going to the continuation school, and bless my mother's heart, she would drive me to the next town and pick me up every day so that I wouldn't spend 2 hours on a bus away from my son. So God bless my parents.
How about that? No, that's great.
It got to the point, because I was a good student. I was like 3 weeks ahead in all my work, getting A's and everything. So I started staying home on Mondays, and I got called into the principal's office for truancy. What are you doing? Why are you missing every Monday? And I said, all my work's done. I got all this done, and what do you want from me? I want to be with my son. It gives me a day with my son. I'm doing what you want me to do. And the principal just looked at me, and you know what he did? He suspended me for the rest of the year. It was like in April. And he suspended me for the rest of the year if I promised to take the high school proficiency test. Because he looked at me and he said, these kids are going to corrupt you.
Yeah, how about that?
His words.
How about that? How about that?
And so he suspended me. I took the test in August, and I passed it. I ended up with my high school diploma 2 years early, went to cosmetology school, and then I ended up getting married and having my family for 18 years. So, and then once I did go back to college, I was enrolled in the New Horizons program, which is a program designed for victims of domestic violence and disenfranchised homemakers. And so the first semester that I went to college, I didn't see a college class. It was all leadership, self-esteem, getting things back on track. So I am a product of those programs. I'm a product of the EOPS program at Victor Valley College, and Carl Smith at VVC is amazing at what he does.
Yes, he is.
Students.
Yes, he is.
So I really, really am a product, and even disabled student services. I have a math learning disability, so I would have extended time. So I am a product of people who have taken that extra step and helped me.
Absolutely.
And even at Claremont, Linda Perkins and Karen Torgeson, they helped me thrive. And then when I went to VVC, my department chair set me up for success. So I've had a lot of people extend themselves for me, and so it's pretty natural to do the same for others, because that's what it's about.
It all makes sense now. I mean, and I often tell people some of the best educators are those that have those life experiences. So now I'm not surprised at all at what you do, with the story you just shared, and I'm also a product of the EOPS at VVC. And
really?
I worked in DSPS there as a student, and had a chance to we'll have to talk about this later because our show is coming to an end, but definitely shout out to Victor Valley College and the EOPS program.
Shout out. Yes.
Absolutely. Thanks to Carl Smith and so many others over there. I could go on and on. Ray Navarro and Jeffrey Holmes and
Ray Navarro,
there's so many. So
he's my guy too.
There you go. Who knew?
Boutros.
Yeah, absolutely. Who knew we had all this? There's so many, and I don't want to miss any, but I'll say Manuel Gaitan and Peggy. There's so many, right? All of them. We need to stop the show before we go over. So I'm just going to say, hey, you've been listening to Let's Chew the Gum, the podcast where we talk about everything from A to Z. My guest today has been Susan Christensen, founding advisor and consultant for Tomorrow's Leaders of the Mojave River Valley. She's also the primary consultant and instructor, CEO of SMC Creative Management Solutions. Really quick, Susan, before we head off, can you just give the listeners an email contact or some way to contact you for further questions, or if they're interested in any of the great programs you're doing?
Probably the best way to contact me is either through my VVC email, which is my name, Susan.Christensen, CHRISTENSEN, at vvc.edu, or my business email is S as in Susan, M as in Marie, C as in Christensen, at PROSSUEC.com. So it's SMC at ProfSuC.com, which is short for Professor Susie, which is my pen name.
There you go.
So check out Auggie the Dragon.
Thank you so much.
Anywhere you buy books.
Absolutely. Go ahead and just give us that whole title once real quick. The book title.
Auggie the Dragon Who Lives on Grandma Sue's Roof. And if you would like to learn about how you can use it as a fundraiser or get signed copies, you can contact me through the emails, and I will get you connected with my local distributor.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. This has been Let's Chew the Gum. Reach out to us at letschewthegum@gmail.com or protocol@gmail.com, protokall@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to have you on the show. Thank you so much. And remember, we always have
Something for your mind. Something for your mind.
집어넣으세요.